Margaret Whitfield, 72, retired schoolteacher from a small English town, mother of one son named Daniel, widow of a bricklayer who taught her patience and thrift, stood very still at the foot of her own staircase and listened to her daughter-in-law whisper, "Make it look like she slipped." The words were quiet as moth wings, but they scraped along my bones like a nail on glass, and I felt the air leave my lungs as if the house itself had decided it no longer needed me to breathe. The night smelt of lavender polish and cold dust. Somewhere outside, a fox barked, and somewhere inside, my heart studied the sound of betrayal the way a student studies a cruel lesson they'll be tested on. I had never felt smaller, and yet I had never felt more awake. Do you know that feeling, dear listener, when your life narrows to a needlepoint and you see everything with painful clarity? Because that is where I was, staring at the banister my late husband had sanded with his own chapped hands, wondering if our son, my child, had really brought this woman into my home to finish what grief could not. Would you keep reading if I told you I decided, then and there, to let them believe they had succeeded? I shuffled into the shadow of the hallway mirror, careless with the old woman act they thought defined me, careful with the razor of what I knew. "She's asleep," Daniel hissed, too close to my kitchen door, as if the fridge hum could hide his conscience. "She takes her pills at 9. It has to look like she woke thirsty, stumbled. No marks, no mess." The marriage vows that made him a man had apparently unknit the boy I'd raised. My throat burned. I swallowed it down. I listened harder. When you realize your blood wants your end, how do you hold your face together? I held mine by gripping the frame of the photo on the wall. John in his last summer, me with a silly sun hat, Daniel squinting at the camera, all of us too alive to imagine this future. I pressed the glass to keep from falling because if I fell now, I would be falling for them. Tell me, at what point does survival become strategy? I made the first move by doing nothing at all. I padded back to my bedroom, closed the door without a click, and sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at the bottle of sleeping tablets on my nightstand and pushed it under the lace runner like a queen hiding her last coin. My old bones learned a new dance. Slow breaths, slower heart, the choreography of a woman preparing to vanish. In the wardrobe, behind my winter coats, lay a metal cash box no one knew about, and at the bottom of it, a small envelope I had addressed weeks ago to Detective Inspector Helen Carter, an ex-pupil of mine who once sent me a Christmas card. Inside, photocopies of my will, the deed to the house, a log of strange withdrawals from my bank account that I had not made, and a letter in my tight teacher's hand that began, "If you are reading this, I may have been helped to die. Would you believe me if I said I had not wanted to use it? That a mother will write the truth and still hope to burn it unread." At 2 a.m. the landing light went on. I lay down fully clothed and stilled my breathing. A step. Soft predatory. The floorboard by the linen cupboard complained. Always that one. And then the door eased open and shut. "Now," Nina breathed. Nina, with her perfect hair and perfect smile and perfect contempt for everything that could not be bought, including me. The glass of water they'd placed on my dresser earlier was supposed to be a kindness. Tonight it was a prop. "Lift her," Daniel muttered. "We make it quick." My son's hand slid under my armpits, the way he used to when I fell laughing into the paddling pool and he was 3. Only now there was no laughter, only the hot stink of fear and aftershave. My cheek brushed his sleeve. The cotton trembled. He trembled. Do monsters shake too, or only the boys they once were? On the threshold of the stairs, I let my head drop and my body sag just enough to be dead weight. "Careful," Nina snapped. "Don't bruise her." I wanted to spit. "Don't bruise me, what a mercy." They half carried, half dragged me to the top step. I could feel the unfriendly mouth of the stairwell below us, open to swallow. I counted the seconds like beads on a rosary. 1 for the first lie I told myself about their marriage, 2 for the second mortgage Daniel took without telling me, 3 for the day I found my signature forged on a check, 4 for the way Nina smiled when I caught her. 5, 6, 7. I whispered a prayer to my husband under my breath, a stranger's liturgy. Let me live long enough to choose the ending. I moved first. Limp turned to life. I slipped sideways and folded into the wall, letting their grip slide off me like wet rope. My palm pressed the panic button disguised as an old doorbell on the skirting. Wired weeks ago to a silent alert that went to Helen Carter's team, because retired schoolteachers with stubborn hunches can hire electricians too. Nina swore. Daniel flinched. The light flickered like a guilty eye. "What was that?" he whispered. "Nothing," she lied. I lifted my head and looked them both in the face. "Oh," Nina said, surprise cracking her like ice. "She's awake." "Of course I'm awake," I said, standing at the top of the stairs like a judge the night before sentencing. "It takes more than greed to put me to sleep." My voice sounded older and braver than I felt. Somewhere my knees were praying for forgiveness. "You emptied my savings," I continued. "You pressured the solicitor to expedite a transfer I never agreed to, and now you're here in my night to escort me to an early grave." Daniel's lips trembled. Nina's eyes narrowed. "You can't prove anything," she said, but her gaze skittered to the hallway camera she believed was decorative. I let the silence tell her it had never been. Blue lights washed the curtains a heartbeat later. Tires sighed on gravel. Doors thudded shut like verdicts. Nina's hand flew to Daniel's wrist. "Who did you tell?" she hissed. "Who knows?" Daniel stared at me, and in his eyes I saw the little boy who used to bring me broken toys and ask if all things could be fixed. "Mum," he said, lower than a prayer. The front door opened, footsteps came in, and a woman's clear voice rose up the staircase. "Mrs. Whitfield?" "Day Carter. Are you safe?" I opened my mouth to answer, but behind me Nina moved, fast, too fast, and something cold and hard pressed into my spine, driving me forward toward the fall. "Do you feel the edge under your toes with me?" And I thought, this is the moment where a mother dies or a plan lives. Which do you think I chose? Before the lights and the sirens and the cold kiss of the stair banister against my back, there was a summer that should have softened everything. I was 20 when I met John Whitfield, 30 when I married him, 45 when we burned our savings to buy this house with its kind, wide windows. Our son Daniel came hungry and loud and full of future. 4 years, the three of us were a small orchestra. Tired, sometimes out of tune, but together. You'd have liked John. He had worker's hands and a poet's patience. He built bookcases along our hall for my history novels and taught Daniel to measure twice, cut once. When he died of a sudden winter, it was the sort of grief that makes clocks rude. I tell you this because it matters. Love matters even when it fails to save us. Isn't that the cruelest education of all? When Daniel brought Nina home, I set the table with my best china and listened to a woman who could make compliments sound like receipts. She was beautiful. Yes, I saw that. I am old, not blind. Sleek as a magazine page, eyes like the last 5 minutes of any auction. She asked about the deed, about the garden, about the old pear tree John had coaxed from a sapling. "How charming," she said, fingering the frame of the wedding photograph. "And who owns what?" It was easy at first to mistake curiosity for care. Tell me, viewers, have you ever smiled at your own misjudgment because the truth tasted worse? Money started vanishing in handfuls. "Investment," Daniel said, new confidence glued over old debts. "Short-term pain, long-term gain." I recognized the tone. Boys who haven't done the reading sound just like that. The mortgage grew a second head. The accounts grew an echo of my signature where it did not belong. I confronted Daniel one rainy afternoon in the kitchen, the kettle roaring like a warning. "Son," I said, and the word felt like a bridge over a river. "Why are my bank statements telling me stories I didn't write?" He looked everywhere but at me. The bridge sagged. "You're old, Mom," he said finally. "Let us take care of things." Have you noticed how "let us take care of things" often means we have already taken them? I bought a notebook with a sprig of rosemary on the cover and wrote everything down. Amounts, names of banks, times Nina returned from spa days, smelling like a victory lap. At night I read my own handwriting the way my students once peeked at answer sheets. To be sure. But suspicion without proof is just anxiety dressed up for court. So I went hunting for proof. The first camera went in a clock on the mantelpiece, the second in the hallway sconce, the third in the pot of the ficus that had never loved me anyway. I learned to watch my house on a small screen like a foreign film, subtitled in disappointment. You might judge me for spying. I judge me for having to. My ex-pupil Helen Carter had left me a Christmas card with her card tucked inside 2 years back. If you ever need anything, Mrs. W., she'd scrawled. Teachers do not forget their children or the troublesome ones who become honorable women. I took the bus to the station one iron gray morning and asked for her. She came down the stairs 2 at a time, taller, sharper, still with the freckle under her eye I used to tease her about when she forgot commas. Tell me everything, she said, and I did. I gave her photocopies of my will, the deed, the suspicious bank slips. She gave me a lesson in patience. Quiet investigations, silent alarms, paperwork that could bite when needed. If it comes to it, she told me, don't be a hero. Be prepared. I wanted to tell her mothers don't get to choose. The day Nina found my pills and told me, in the tone one uses for losing keys, darling, you really shouldn't leave your medication lying around, it's dangerous. I heard something ring, a bell I did not own. She had memorized my routines. She knew when I napped, when I watered the roses, when I watched my quiz show with a biscuit 7:30. You should move in with us, she said sweetly. Let us take the old house off your hands, it's too much. My hands shook as I stitched a button onto a cardigan that didn't need one. This house, I said, is my marriage. It fits me. She laughed. Clothes can be altered. Tell me, when someone tries to tailor your life for you, how fast do you run? A week later, she mentioned a stairlift brochure and left it open to the accidental falls page like a prayer card. Daniel pretended to tidy the garage and moved the heavy boxes to the top shelves where I would have to climb to reach them. Little irritations, small malices, paper cuts arranged into a fatal design. I wondered how many older women vanished in domestic misadventures, while the world sent them flowers and avoided the word murder. My chest clenched around the thought like a fist. I carried the cash box up from the cellar that night. I wrote the letter to Helen. I walked the stairs 3 times in the dark until my feet learned every groan. Preparation felt like blasphemy and insurance at once. What would you have done? On the afternoon I caught Daniel in my study with a ledger open, his fingers tracing numbers like rosary beads. He looked up and smiled the way a boy smiles when he is already forgiven. Mum, he said, you've done well. Think how helpful this could be to all of us. My name in his mouth sounded like a door someone was closing. I taught you your letters, I whispered, and I was not talking about the alphabet. He folded the ledger slowly, took off his wedding ring as if it weighed him down, put it in his pocket, then changed his mind and put it back on. Something about that small confusion made me want to wrap him in a blanket and lock him in the past where I had not yet failed him. But time is a one-way street, and I was already halfway down. The night they came to help me to the stairs, I had been awake for hours, rereading John's last note from the hospice. Keep the house, he'd scrawled, his hand a trapped bird on the paper. Keep the peace where you can, Margaret. But never let them think you are smaller than you are. The kettle clicked off. The clock ticked. The fox barked. When my son lifted me and my daughter-in-law counted the steps under her breath like someone measuring a grave, I understood the kind of courage widows are not praised for. The courage to look betrayal in the eye and call it by its name. And then the blue lights came and Helen's voice rose, and the moment tightened like a noose around the truth, and Nina moved behind me with something hard in her hand, and as my heel touched the edge, 1 more inch and gravity would hold all my decisions. I had to choose whether I would fall or fight. Can you guess which path keeps a mother standing? I chose to fall but not forward. I let my knees go, let my ankles fold, became a puddle of old woman at the top of the stairs and slid sideways into the newel post with a grunt that sounded convincing enough to be death. Nina's breath caught. Daniel's hands scraped at my sleeves, grasping for a script that suddenly had no lines. She's going, Nina hissed, and for a moment, triumphant panic lit her face like a match in a dark room. Then Helen called again from below, and the light in Nina's eyes guttered. Timing, my late husband used to say, is the difference between a cut and a cure. I stopped breathing. Counted to 5. I let my mouth sag open. Do you know how humiliating it is to mimic your own corpse? I did it anyway. Survival makes beggars of our dignity. Boots thundered up the stairs. Hands where I can see them, Helen snapped, and her colleagues flooded the landing. Nina stepped back, all trembling innocence. Daniel stayed frozen, the way a boy freezes when he realizes the monster under the bed is himself. Mrs. Whitfield. Helen knelt beside me, her freckle haloed by the landing light. Cracked one eye just enough. There you are, she whispered, relief and fury braided tight. Ambulance is 2 minutes out. She raised her voice. We came on a welfare check. Neighbors reported noises. Lucky, isn't it? She did not look at the sconce camera. She did not need to. Nina started to cry the way actresses do. It was a terrible accident, she said, and the cops' pens paused at the same time. She got dizzy. We tried to help. Didn't we, Daniel? My son swallowed. Yeah, he said softly, and the lie slipped into the air like steam, visible for a moment, then gone, unless you know where to put your hand to feel the heat. Helen's partner, a calm man with eyebrows like stern commas, cleared his throat. Mind if we look around? He asked, in the voice people use when they are not asking. Nina smiled too hard. Please, she said. Anything you need. Anything but the truth, I thought. They found the stairlift brochure on the kitchen table with Nina's neat notes about life insurance payouts on the back. They found the ledger page with recent withdrawals paperclipped to a list of care home options, highlighted in yellow, as if my future was a shopping list. They found a rubber doorstop planted midway down the stairs, an odd leaf on an otherwise bare branch, positioned just so. A little nudge to catch a heel. Helen photographed everything. Her face the blank wall against which lies bruise themselves. You've been thorough, Nina, she said mildly. In my experience, thoroughness is a sign of love. Or planning. The ambulance crew wheeled me carefully to the rug by the hall so they could check my vitals. I let my chest flutter, my lids droop, my pulse perform an old woman's opera. Strong, the paramedic said under his breath. You're a stubborn one. I squeezed his hand. Teacher, I whispered. We don't give up easily. He smiled, and the smile steadied me. Helen crouched again. You triggered the silent, she said softly. I'm glad you trusted your instincts. I would have laughed if laughing hadn't threatened to spoil the theater. Trust, I thought, is a house we keep building even when the rain gets in. Can we go? Nina asked, voice wobbling, eyes measuring the exits. We're shaken. Helen tilted her head. Of course, she said. After we collect statements. Under caution. The words hit like stones. Daniel flinched. Nina stiffened. What caution? She demanded. You can't treat us, Helen raised a hand. You are free to leave, she said, perfectly polite. But if you do, we will come find you. And it will be inconvenient. She turned to Daniel. Mr. Whitfield, when did your mother last update her will? He blinked. I don't know. He did know. He had been trying to know better. I spoke then, my voice thin but steady. Last month, I said. After Nina called the solicitor to clarify the survivorship clause. Nina's lips parted. What? She gasped, performing shock again. Why would I? I lifted a finger, and the old classroom obeyed. Everyone fell quiet. Because you were worried that if I died before Daniel, the house would pass entirely to him without you getting your cut, I said calmly. You forget, my dear, that age is not stupidity. It's experience with wrinkles. Her eyes darkened, and for the first time that night, I saw not a mask but a naked want. It was not pretty. Helen stood. We'll pause here, she said to her team. Let's review the footage Mrs. Whitfield stored remotely. She glanced at Nina, almost kindly. Technology is a marvel. Even older folks get the hang of it. Nina folded her arms, suddenly very young and very small. Daniel made a sound like a man about to be sick. Mom, he said again, the word squeezed out of him. We didn't mean, he stopped. The sentence had nowhere safe to go. He looked at the kitchen, the photos, the stairs, anywhere but at me. That, more than anything, stung. Not the plot, not the plan, but the refusal to meet the eyes that had watched him learn to walk. Tell me, where do you put a disappointment too big for a cupboard? They separated us then. Good practice, Helen told me later, so statements couldn't sink like evil twins. In the front room, a blanket around my shoulders, I told my story without embroidery. I am not fragile, I said, but I am not foolish either. I knew what I knew, and when I did not, I waited to. The paramedic squeezed my shoulder. You've got fight, he murmured. No, I said. I've got love for this house, and love when cornered has claws. Across the hall, Nina's voice rose, then sharpened, then thinned. Upstairs, Daniel cried. A high, shocked sound that did not belong in a man's throat and yet fit him horribly well. How does a mother hold that? I held it by looking out the window at the pear tree my husband had coaxed into fruit, remembering that good things grow slowly and bad plans sometimes ripen all at once. An hour later, when the night was almost spent and the fox had gone quiet, Helen came back into the room with a printed still from the hallway camera. Daniel and Nina, at the top of the stairs, my limp body between them, the rubber wedge in place, Nina's hand ghosting the stair edge like a signature. We'll take it from here, she said gently. You are safe with us. If the word felt both too big and not big enough. Nina stood in the doorway, white-faced. Daniel behind her, blotchy. We'll get lawyers, Nina snapped, but the snap had no teeth. Do, Helen said pleasantly. Bring them biscuits. They'll be here a while. She gestured to her colleagues, and the house filled with the choreography of consequence. Rights read, wrists turned, metal clicked. My son did not look at me as the bracelets went on. My heart stumbled, then stood up again. And just as the front door opened to the blue kiss of the police car's lights, a car I had not seen all night drove up the lane and stopped behind the cruisers, and a woman in a dark coat stepped out, face hidden by the brim of her hat. Helen turned, surprised. Who's that? She asked. I stared, blood turned to ice at the sight, because the last person I expected tonight had come home. Who do you think it was? The woman in the dark coat tipped back her hat, and the hallway light lifted the years off her face. Emily Ford, my late husband's sister, estranged for a decade, the keeper of one family secret too heavy for me to carry alone. She had left town after a bitter row over a loan John never repaid because cancer does not respect due dates, and pride, mine and hers, had kept us strangers since. Now she stood in my doorway like a ghost with receipts. Maggie, she said, and just my nickname broke something hard and hurting in my chest. I got your message. My message. I hadn't sent one. Then I saw Helen's small nod. She had. A teacher teaches. A detective delivers. Do you believe in timely mercies? Emily's gaze moved from Helen to Daniel to Nina to the handcuffs glinting like wrong jewelry. Oh, she said softly, and her mouth went a new shape I could not name. She stepped inside, shut the door against the blue wash of the night, and took my hands. Her skin was cold. I'm sorry I stayed away, she murmured, and the apology came too late for some harms and in time for others. I'm sorry I let money become bigger than blood. I looked up into her stubborn face and felt the oddest relief. Someone who remembered my beginning had arrived in time for my middle. Does that make sense to you? Does it to any of us when we are tired? Helen gave us a moment, then cleared her throat. Ms. Ford, she said, you said you had information relevant to Mrs. Whitfield's safety? Emily nodded, reached into her bag, and pulled out a packet of papers held together by a red elastic band. John's second policy, she said simply. Private. One he took out after the diagnosis in my name, to keep it out of sight of opportunists. He meant it for Maggie and for Daniel's child someday, if there was one. She looked at Nina's hard mouth, then back to me. I've been paying the premiums quietly. I didn't trust how things were going in this house. She placed the papers in Helen's hands. It's due to pay out next spring if Maggie's living and well. Living and well. A combination tonight's plan had tried to undo. Nina swore, a small animal sound. You hid money, she snapped at me, as if I had cast a spell that denied her a throne. I shook my head, small and slow. Your appetite is not my grocery list, I said. Helen raised a palm. Enough, she said mildly. A teacher in a different uniform. She looked through the documents, then at me. This changes motive, she murmured. It adds weight to the conspiracy angle. She met Daniel's eyes. And it saves you from one lie you were about to tell. He dropped his gaze. I wasn't, he stopped. He was. Emily leaned close. Maggie, she whispered. Come stay with me a few nights. Her breath smelt of mint and worry. This house is strong, but you don't have to be brave inside it alone. The idea made me dizzy. A bed not watched by want, tea poured by someone who remembered my maiden name. But I looked past her shoulder at the pear tree through the glass, at the staircase where my husband's hand still lived in the wood, at the clock that had counted my days teaching and retiring and grieving and discovering the guilty in my own kitchen. I will sleep in my house, I said quietly. Tomorrow we can talk about where I rest. Helen nodded, approving of some lesson I hadn't realized I'd learned. They led Nina and Daniel to the car. He stumbled once on the step and caught himself, then finally looked at me, eyes red and hysterically young. Mom, he said, a man's voice straining around a boy's plea. Behind him, Nina's face shut like a door in a storm. I didn't speak. My words were a small kingdom. I had to decide who got to live there. Helen squeezed my elbow. We'll take first statements at the station, she told them, professional, careful, not unkind. The car doors closed. The night exhaled. Emily and I stood in the hall like two ends of a torn ribbon, trying to remember how to knot ourselves together. I made tea, I said, and we both laughed, because what else do women do when the world rearranges its furniture at 3 a.m.? In the kitchen, with the kettle singing and our breaths finally joining a human rhythm, Emily told me a story I hadn't known. That John had been afraid of me being alone, that he'd asked her to watch from a distance because he knew my stubbornness like his own, that she'd argued with him and then obeyed because love is sometimes just doing the thing you don't want to do for the person you can't live without. I stayed away too long, she said, eyes shining. And then I saw Daniel posting photos of holidays that didn't match a teacher's pension. We sat with that. Shame and relief are first cousins. They visit together. Helen came back in, paperwork rustling. We'll keep them for questioning, she said softly. And we'll station a car outside until morning. Just in case someone thinks night has more tricks to play. Thanked her. She smiled in a way I remembered from her spelling tests, when she got everything right and pretended she hadn't. You taught me to write things down, she said. It still saves lives. I wanted to tell her that tonight, the life it saved was mine. I wanted to tell her that the lesson had cost me every illusion I had about my son and purchased me a future where I could stand at my window and watch the sun climb over a pear tree without wondering which shadow belonged to me. But the words were heavy with too much midnight. I sipped my tea instead, and it tasted like coming back from a cliff. As dawn bled into the sky, the house changed temperature like a fever breaking. Emily dozed on the sofa. I sat in John's chair and watched the light push into corners where fear had incubated. I should have been triumphant. I was only tired. Grief for the boy Daniel had been kept tapping the glass, asking to be let in. I kept it outside. There would be time later to grieve properly, and to rage, and to forgive perhaps the parts of him that could still be forgiven. For now there was only breathing and the clock and the smallest joy. I was alive to hear it all. And then the phone rang, slicing the quiet. The display showed a number I knew too well. My solicitor's office. Why would he call it Dawn? Unless there was one more document I hadn't seen, one more choice someone had tried to make for me without asking. Should I answer? The solicitor's voice came through stiff and papery, like a letter read aloud. Mrs. Whitfield, it's Edward Lane. Forgive the hour. I was woken by a call from a junior clerk who found a file placed on my desk overnight. An addendum to your will. It bears your signature but not your hand. I thought you should know before business hours. I pressed the receiver tighter. Forgery again, but bolder. Greed had grown teeth. Read it to me, I said, my mouth dry. He did. In clean legalese, the addendum granted Daniel and his spouse immediate executorship, with power to sell the house to cover care obligations at their discretion. There it was, tidy as theft in church clothes. When was it lodged? Asked. Yesterday, he said. A courier. My heartbeat shuffled its cards. Yesterday in daylight, while Nina suggested putting me somewhere safe. How many times had I mistaken plotting for kindness because the kettle was on and the curtains were open? Do you ever realize the lie only when it has learned to use its inside voice? I told Edward what the night had brought. The police, the footage, the attempt staged like a stumble. He went very quiet. Then listen to me, he said finally, urgency flattening his vowels. Do not sign anything. Do not let anyone represent you but me. And there's more. A request was emailed to transfer the deed into a new family trust with Daniel as primary trustee. We paused it pending your confirmation. The email bore your address. Closed my eyes. My own name dragged round a ring like a bull. It wasn't me, I said. Of course, he replied. But we'll need to prove it. Emily stirred on the sofa. Helen, still nearby, stepped into the doorway, intuition pricking her like cold. I nodded at the phone and she came closer, the way good people move toward a fire. How many caretakers does it take to relight one woman's sense of safety? By 8 o'clock the station called. Daniel had asked for a solicitor and gone quiet. Nina had gone loud, blaming him, blaming me, blaming the economy, blaming the pressure of caring for elders who won't modernize, as if my refusal to die on time was a financial crime. She's unwell, Helen reported. Unwell with intent. I rubbed my temples, feeling the dull, guilty throb of a mother who raised a son with a soft heart and then watched the world harden him into angles he mistook for strength. What happens now? Asked. We seek a protection order, Helen said. We secure your finances, lodge a fraud report, seize devices, and interview again. And we ask you to stay somewhere with company. Emily reached for my hand. I let her find it. The smallest bravery sometimes is letting someone hold you where you shake. We spent the morning with Edward at my kitchen table, the house reclaiming its purpose as a place where life is administered and not stolen. He photographed the forged addendum, compared my signature to the stubborn schoolteacher's slant I'd had since chalk and canes went out of fashion. Amateur, he judged, lips thin. Traced likely. See the tremor. And here, the hesitation at the crossbar. Whoever did this doesn't write M's like you, Mrs. Whitfield. They draw them. He spoke like a man who had fallen in love with ink long before he married law. I felt seen, my handwriting a person who could testify for me. Can your name be a witness? Today mine was. We drafted notices. Revocation of all powers of attorney, freezing of any joint accounts, a formal instruction to the land registry to flag suspicious activity. Helen arranged a forensic sweep of Daniel and Nina's devices, a warrant for the courier service, a request for bank footage. I made tea, because a woman does not surrender every habit, even while reclaiming her future. Emily picked up the pear windfall under the tree and set it on the sill like a medal for surviving the night. Remember when John climbed that ladder against doctor's orders to prune this tree? She said softly. He came down with a smile like he'd outwitted God. We both smiled, thin but real. Grief can live on a windowsill and not own the house. By noon, a car pulled up I did not recognize. A woman in a navy dress stepped out, hair clipped, face brisk with purpose. Ms. Harper, she introduced herself in the hall. From adult safeguarding. Referrals were made overnight. My hackles rose. Independence is a dress that has fit me decades. Helen patted my elbow. They're here for you, not at you, she murmured. Ms. Harper proved it. She asked me what I wanted, the rare, holy question, and wrote it down without fuss. You will decide, she said. Our job is to make sure no one decides for you under duress. My eyes stung. Imagine hearing in one sentence the opposite of what your own blood planned. We returned from giving statements a little past 4 to a house that felt almost normal, the clock pushing the afternoon toward tea as if outrage wasn't setting up camp in my marrow. I sat, and a fatigue thick as winter climbed my legs. Rest, Emily urged. I'll answer the phone. I must have slept because I woke to voices arguing on the front step. A man's low rumble, a woman's darting fury, and, impossible, my son's little boy cry. I stood heart-stumbling. Through the frosted glass I saw Daniel's outline, shoulders hunched, Nina a sharp shard at his side. Helen's car door slammed. She was quicker than thunder. "They can't be here," she barked. "There's an order in place." Nina pointed a finger like a pistol at the house. "She's stolen my life," she shrieked. "She's stolen what's ours." She lunged. Time slowed. The step, the door, my ribs, the memory of his hand under my elbow when he was 3. All of it layered in one impossible second as the latch clicked, because someone inside had unlocked it while I was sleeping. Who and why? Emily stood behind me, breath held, hand still on the key. "I thought," she began, guilt spilling. She had only meant to air the hallway, to let the day in, to shoo out the stale fear. Instead, she'd opened a mouth for trouble. Nina tried to push past, entitled as weather. Helen was already there, palm a wall. "Step back," she said, voice level as a plumb line. "You're breaching conditions." Daniel didn't step forward or back. He stood like a man who has knocked on the wrong door and found himself at his own reckoning instead. "Mum," he said, and my name in his mouth finally cracked me in two. "Please, let me talk to you." "Without her." He glanced at Nina as if she'd grown suddenly inconvenient. She bristled, new threat scenting old panic. "Careful," she hissed. "We're in this together." He flinched. "Are we?" He was not asking me. Helen eased the door shut without slamming it. A kindness for my heart if not for my temper. "Mr. Whitfield," she said through the letterbox. "Your solicitor can arrange supervised contact later this week. Today you will go." Behind her, a second patrol car rolled to the curb. Blue lights stayed unlit, Mercy choosing not to turn the street into a spectacle. Nina's fury picked a new target, Emily. "Oh, the poor aunt appears," she sneered. "Back to sniff the money you ignored." Emily's jaw set. "I came back to hold my sister," she said, calm as a churchyard. "And to witness what kind of woman you are." Nina laughed. A brittle, lovely sound like glass breaking into precise shapes used to hurt. "I'm the woman who fixes what timid people leave broken," she spat. "Move." Then a thing happened I'd not put in any plan. Daniel stood between Nina and my door. "Stop," he said, voice raw. "Enough." She blinked, thrown. He had never told her no in front of me. "Dan," she began. He shook his head. "You were going to let my mother die." He said it like reading his own name on a list of the dead. "So were you," Nina shot back, and the truth hit him visibly, shoulders dipping as if the word itself had weight. He closed his eyes. A boy remembering the first time he lied to his mother and how easy it had felt, a man feeling the bill come due. "I want a deal," he said to Helen suddenly, eyes opening onto a shore he'd avoided. "I'll tell you everything if you don't charge Mum with wasting police time." He'd turned guilt into barter. Perhaps some part of him still believed the world ran on bargains like the ones he made with himself in mirrors. "Do you know the sound your heart makes when hope tries to lift it and caution pins it down?" "Inside," Helen said to me low. "Let's sit." She stepped out to confer with her colleagues. The door closed. The house exhaled. Emily swore softly. "The nerve," she whispered. "The sheer cheek." I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, as if the door could share its patience. "He's drowning," I said. "He thinks confession is a life jacket." I straightened. "It might be." We moved to the front room. Through the crack in the curtain, I watched my child pace a path he had drawn for himself while I was busy keeping the windows clean. By evening, the station had taken statements from neighbors who'd heard voices, from the postman who had a story about an urgent parcel last week addressed to me with Nina's tidy caps, from the courier company clerk who remembered a woman with a perfume like lilies and an attitude like a blade. The case thickened like gravy on the boil. "We'll proceed to charge," Helen said, fatigue hiding behind professionalism. "Conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm, fraud by false representation, undue influence. There may be more." Words that sound like iron. I wanted to be relieved. Instead I felt hollowed out, a house after a party full of strangers, sticky floors and broken stems, the air full of what people said when they thought the owner wasn't listening. Have you ever wanted justice and rest at the same time and felt like there was only energy for one? That night, Emily spread a blanket on the sofa again. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom and looked at the nightstand where the pill bottle used to sit like a timed wrist. The lace runner covered the panic button by the skirting. I lifted the lace, touched the small circle, then let it fall. "Thank you," I told the bell, and the bell did not answer, which is how gratitude often works. Sleep came in fragments. Scenes replayed, stair edges, Daniel's voice saying, "Mum," with 5 different meanings. Nina's face when the handcuffs closed like a door she had once believed was open for her everywhere. I dreamed of pears too heavy for the branch, of ladders that held if you trusted them and snapped if you didn't, of children building dens under tables and deciding who was in and who was out. I woke at 4 with a taste of metal. Downstairs, a floorboard creaked that shouldn't have. I sat up, hard a drum. Emily snored softly in the sitting room. The house held its breath. Was it an old timber settling, or someone who didn't believe in locks? I did not switch on the light. I have taught children and outweighted grief. I can outweight shadows. Barefoot, I left the bed and moved along the landing, skirting the noise boards I knew by heart. Below, the back door latch whispered, "Key." The kitchen window caught a sliver of street lamp and put it on the floor like a knife blade. I eased to the top of the stairs and looked down. A figure stood in the hallway, thinner than Daniel, smaller than Nina, a woman's careful shape in a hoodie too big. She turned her head and the hood slipped. Profile I didn't know. The front door clicked shut, as if she'd let herself in and was about to let herself out. Did fear make me foolish or old cunning make me brave? I don't know. I spoke. "You've missed the party," I said, my voice colder than I felt. She jumped, then froze, an animal halfway back into the hedge. "Who's there?" she whispered, as if the house might answer with a name she preferred. "The owner," I replied. "You are." She pushed the hood back fully. 20-something. Pale with the pallor of indoors work. Eyes red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep. Her hand trembled around a thin file folder. "I'm Charlotte," she said. "I used to nanny for friends of Nina's." She swallowed. "She paid me to drop off something here. Yesterday. To the solicitor. Then she didn't pay the second half. And when I saw the news alerts." She gestured helplessly. "I can't be part of this." I brought back what she asked me to take. She held out the folder, shaking. "Please don't call the police. I need out." I came down 2 steps, then stopped, the memory of last night snapping at my ankles. "Put it on the hall table," I said. "And sit there on the bottom stair, so my old legs don't have to chase you if you change your mind." She obeyed, almost relieved to be told what to do. The folder contained printouts, emails drafted from an account in my name, a scan of my signature practice sheet, my letters copied 10 times like a child forging a parent note, and courier receipts. Nina's instructions in bullet points with the briskness of someone ordering flowers. "You'll give this to the police," I said softly. Charlotte nodded, small. "I will. I'm scared." She looked up at me like a student too late with homework who finally tells the truth. "She said I was helping secure an old lady's care. She said you were confused." I believed her because the money was good and rent is a cliff. "I am sorry." I believed her. Not because I am soft, but because the world makes accomplices of those it underpays and the guilty of those it undervalues. "Sit," I said again. "Have water." I poured a glass. My hands didn't shake. Emily woke to find us sitting like mismatched chess pieces in the dawn light. She took it in, my posture, the girl's fear, the folder, and made tea because we are English and there are rituals even burglars must submit to. Helen arrived with the first birds when I rang. No sirens, just a car and her tired face and a notebook always forgiving of ink. She listened, took the folder, thanked Charlotte carefully, and did not threaten her with prison. "Come with us," she said instead. "Make a statement and we'll connect you with support." Witnesses matter. Charlotte cried out of relief, maybe for the first time in a long time. Have you ever noticed how mercy makes people sob harder than punishment? The day swung then into a new rhythm. Statements, calls from Edward with good news, the land registry flag held, the trust transfer froze. Bad news, 2 accounts emptied beyond what we can claw back without a fight. Neutral news, press interest that would not be fed. A neighbor left a casserole on the step like a small apology for ever thinking my geraniums were too bright. The pear tree dropped 3 fruit with soft thumps like sentences concluding. Emily scrubbed the banister as if polishing wood could rub out the memory of my back pressed against it. The long mouth of the stairs waiting for a body. I won't let the house remember you this way, she muttered. Love cleaning up another's fear. It is a labor as holy as baptism. By late afternoon, Helen returned. Charges are formal, she said. We'll oppose Nina's bail. Daniel may be released under strict conditions. His cooperation buys him that much. The fairness of it stung and soothed in equal measure. He'll need a place to stay, Helen added, watching my face. Not here, Emily answered for me, fire under her quiet. He nodded. Not here, I confirmed. Let him learn what walls are like when they don't contain your mother's forgiveness. Harsh. Perhaps. Necessary. Definitely. I wrote a message for him anyway. Left with Helen to be delivered only if he asked for it without Nina shaping his mouth. I love you. I cannot be your alibi or your mattress. Be the man your father would have respected, not the boy your wife trained. When you have something true to offer, my door will be open during daylight hours, with someone present. Boundaries can be bridges when built with honest timber. At dusk the phone rang again. Edward. Mrs. Whitfield, he said gently. One more matter. There's an old letter in our archive. John deposited it years ago with instructions to hand it over should there be family strife about the house. I Saturday read it, I said, my throat a tight door. He did. In John's clumsy scrawl. If our son ever makes you choose between him and the house, choose the house. The house is you. He will find himself again only when he cannot hide in your rooms. I cried then, loud and unpretty, relief and sorrow mixing into something that tasted like a bitter tea that still warms. Emily held me and didn't say shoo. Sometimes letting a woman cry loud is the bravest thing you can do. When I had wrung out, I wiped my face. Thank you, I told the empty air. Message received. And then, like a child testing a new tooth with her tongue, I whispered the words I hadn't let myself yet. I will not lose myself to save my son. The house listened. The night pressed its ear to the window. And somewhere a car engine idled in the lane too long to be a coincidence. Who had come now? And why when the day had used up all its kindness? The engine cut. Feet on gravel. A knock. Measured, not angry. Helen's patrol checked the porch camera and waved the visitor through. A woman stepped into the hall in a neat gray suit, mid-40s, eyes sober, a thin laptop under her arm. Ms. Doyle, she introduced herself, from the bank's serious incidents team. She inclined her head toward Helen. We've been liaising. He turned to me. Mrs. Whitfield, I owe you an apology on behalf of my branch. Some transactions should have raised flags sooner. Her voice held the specific shame of a competent person discovering her system had left a widow standing alone in a tide. We're initiating an internal review, she continued. And I've brought provisional paperwork for restitution on the unauthorized withdrawals pending court outcome. She placed the folder down like someone returning a stolen photograph. The breath I didn't know I was holding left me. Some wrongs don't reverse. Some do, even if slowly, with interest paid in nerves. We sat round the table again. How many wars have been fought and ended in kitchens? And moved through the anatomy of my near ruin. Ms. Doyle's fingers were brisk, her questions clean. Did you receive calls pressuring you to confirm payments? Did anyone ask for codes? Yes, once, and I had hung up because my fear had finally learned to say no. Did your son ever call from the same room as your daughter-in-law when asking about money? Often. Coaching, she murmured, writing. It felt surgical. naming each cut so it could be stitched. I felt less like a victim and more like a patient healing on purpose. Do you understand the difference? I had not until today. Halfway through, Emily's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned, then passed it to me. A text from an unknown number. A photo of my back gate ajar with a message. Loose ends look like this. Helen's head snapped up when I showed her. She dispatched the patrol in a blink. We waited, the house coiled. The pear tree a silhouette at the kitchen window like a witness who refuses the stand but will not leave the courtroom. The officers returned with nothing but the gate to report. A prod, Helen judged. Someone trying to keep you afraid. She turned to Ms. Doyle. We'll need to analyze any staff contacts with the parties. If any bank employee cut corners, we need it clean. Ms. Doyle nodded, already building a checklist in the air. Fear tried to rise in me. Indignation pushed it down. We are not prey, I said aloud, surprising myself. We are women with pens. We all almost laughed. Almost. Near midnight, after the patrols had looped the block twice and Emily had stacked papers into neat piles of sorrows we could manage, the doorbell rang again, a single chime like a question. I felt my ribs climb my spine. Helen checked the screen, then opened. Daniel stood alone, no Nina, rain on his hair, shame on his shoes. He looked smaller, as if the night had pressed his edges in. I've been released, he said to Helen, not to me. Bail conditions. I needed to give my mother this. He held up a phone. It's Nina's old one. She gave it to me when she upgraded. I think there are messages on it, from her to others about plans. Plans. The word tried to shake in his hand and failed. Why bring it? Helen asked. Because I want you to see the truth even when it ruins me, he said, the sentence landing like the first honest plank in a bridge. My heart stepped onto it and did not fall through. He didn't ask to come in. He placed the phone in a bag Helen offered and scrawled a password on her card. Hands finally too busy to ring. Mum, he said, not stepping toward me, not away. I was a coward. I liked feeling like a man and mistook cruelty for backbone. I let someone talk about you like you were a problem instead of the reason I grew up safe. His voice broke. You can never forgive me, and still I will spend what's left of my life trying to deserve your front gate. I did not move. Mercy is not a reflex. It is a decision with a spine. Be sober, I said. Be truthful. Be kind to cashiers and cleaners and men with smaller cars than yours. Start there. You cannot live here. But you can walk toward a life that will not sicken your father's memory. He nodded once hard. Yes. He turned to go, then paused. She won't stop, he said quietly. Nina. If she's free before trial. Fear smelled like lilies again. Let her try, Emily answered, stepping beside me, small and fierce. She'll find a pear tree with deeper roots than she understands. After he left, Helen placed the bagged phone on the table as if it were a bomb we were relieved to have outside our bodies. Sleep, she said to me. We work in the morning. I went to bed and dreamt of chalk on blackboards, of small hands taking big letters and making them their own, of erasers cleaning cruelty neatly from a slate, of ink drying on documents that said, "This will not happen here again." When I woke, the house was full of the kind of silence that isn't empty, it's ready. And then Helen's text arrived. We've unlocked messages. You need to see one. Need not should. My mouth went dry. What kind of message rearranges a mother's past as viciously as last night rearranged my future? We gathered in the station's small interview room because the sight of my stares still put thunder in my bones. Helen slid printed messages across to me. The first threads were what we expected. Nina to a friend named Tara, mock-sweet and venom-tipped, about old lady wealth extraction, about edges and timelines. Then other names appeared. A man with a burner number, talking in the shorthand of men who consider risk management a personality trait. A junior clerk at the solicitors, trading late-night help for gift cards and compliments. The nanny, Charlotte, short messages, hesitant, the kind good liars harvest from hungry, honest people. Ugly, yes, but survivable. Then the last thread. It was to Daniel. Not from Nina, but from my son 6 months ago. I can't do this, it read. She's my mother. A reply from Nina. She's an opportunity. She raised you to be poor. And then, not from him, but forwarded by him to someone else, some number saved as Dad's sister. Emily. My stomach flipped. He had asked her for help and never sent it. Keep reading, Helen urged gently. A draft message unsent, still sitting in the phone's memory. Aunt Em, I'm scared. I've let things get bad. If I bring Mum to you, will you keep us both safe while I fix it? He had typed it and never pressed send. Pride. Fear. Nina's hand. Fate turned on a thumb and a screen. Emily pressed her knuckles to her mouth. Oh, Danny, she whispered, the name only people who knew him as a child still used. Relief and rage braided in me like rope. He had wanted rescue before he learned the word for what he was doing was harm. He had stood at a fork and chosen the downhill road because it was paved. He had asked for a map and thrown it away. How many tragedies are made of exactly that? Helen pointed to another exchange 3 weeks ago. Nina. Once we have the paper, we find her at the bottom of the stairs. You hold her, I call. Itiri. We are free. Daniel. This feels like a line we can't uncross. Nina. Exactly. There it was. The temptation dressed as inevitability. I dropped my head into my hands and let out a sound I hoped to never hear from myself again. Helen's hand landed on my shoulder, anchor warm. We'll build a case that shows his second thoughts, she said. It matters. It doesn't undo, but it matters. I nodded. The nod of a woman adding beads to a rosary of reasons to still love her son without loving his choices. The solicitor's junior clerk was arrested by noon. The courier confessed by tea. Tara, the friend, brought in with the smell of smoke on her hair and contempt on her mouth, rolled her eyes at the idea of consequences, until she saw the charge sheet. The web showed itself, each thread sticky with someone's need dressed as ambition. Ms. Doyle from the bank sent updates as if she owed me her lunch hour until Christmas. She probably did. Charlotte, the nanny, met with a support worker who talked to her as if she were a person instead of a resource. An education some of us never get and all of us deserve. There were good turns in the day like that. Small ones that asked to be noticed. I noticed them even as I bled patience. By the time we drove home, late sun lit the pear tree into a stained glass saint. Emily laughed through her nose. John would say we've held the line, she said. He'd boil potatoes and talk like a general. Smiled tired. Then he'd wash up, I said, and we both smiled wider because marriage is exactly that, strategy and suds. We ate toast for supper. We did not speak of Nina. We said Daniel's name once like a prayer and let it sit between us without commentary, which is a kind of respect for grief. Before bed, I stood by the banister and placed my palm where my back had been pressed. Not today, I told the stairs. Not ever if I can help it. And as if to test my bravado, my phone pinged with a withheld number and a voice note icon. Press play. Nina's voice filled the room. Steady, poisonous, unbroken. You think you've won, she said softly. But I know where your sister goes for her morning walk. Accidents aren't just for stairs. The file ended. The room tilted. Emily reached for me. I reached for the panic button. Some nights give you back your life. Some ask you to defend it again before the kettle boils. Which would this be? We did not panic. We practiced. I moved through the house like a teacher on a drill. Call Helen, do not text. Forward the file, do not reply. Lock back, front and garden gates. Say the plan out loud so your fear hears it and stands down. Emily, I said, already on the phone to Helen. We will not walk alone. We will not very routine. We will not be generous with our whereabouts. Emily nodded, jaw grinding, not with fear but with something older and sharper. Let her try, she said again, the phrase finding depth. I left too long. I am here now. Helen's car arrived before the kettle clicked. She listened to the message, twice, a muscle in her cheek ticking. Bail hearing tomorrow, she said. I will be there. Crown prosecution will be there. We'll present this. She won't step onto pavement tonight except between doors with locks. She looked at me. You will not step onto pavement without one of us near. Felt like being small and also like being loved hard enough to be bossed. Said yes. Dawn came with police coffee that tastes like budget and determination. We drove to the court in a convoy that made me feel, absurdly, like a head of state with a very modest kingdom. One pear tree, a banister, a stash of good tea towels, and a name I refused to let other people write. The hearing was swift because the night had placed its thumb on the scales. Nina arrived in a suit the shade of apology. Her eyes were knives. The prosecutor read the threats in a tone that did not invite interpretation. Her solicitor spoke about community ties and misunderstandings and menopausal mood swings. Of mine, not hers. The room's collective inhale sounded like a string section tuning to outrage. The magistrate, a woman with hair like winter steel, looked over her glasses and said, "Bail denied." A sentence that felt like a door catching safely instead of swinging on its hinge into the void. Daniel, seated 2 rows behind, put his face in his hands and sobbed soundlessly. I watched his back move and felt something old and honest break free inside me. The part that still believed he could be more than this. Not today. Someday. After. He did not look up as they led his wife away. She didn't look back. Perhaps she couldn't. Perhaps she knew that to look back is to see the truth, and few of us are ambitious enough for that kind of pain. We walked outside into a cool London morning that smelled briefly of bread, briefly of bus exhaust, briefly of a future where my house would be boring again, where danger would be something the news sold and not something I seasoned my tea with. The months that followed did not become a montage, though sometimes I wished for one. Real time is less elegant. Statements given, cross-examinations endured, bank restitution dripped back like rain into every room where a bucket sits. Charlotte found a new job with a family whose idea of help wasn't quick cash and a bruise on the conscience. The junior clerk lost her position and kept her freedom by telling everything under oath. Perhaps that is justice's mercy, to let a mistake divert a life instead of define it. Ms. Doyle's review resulted in a letter with actual apology printed on actual paper, an endangered species I held as a relic of accountability. Daniel attended counseling because a bail condition told him to, and then because he wanted to. We did not meet. We did exchange letters. Not many, carefully read by my solicitor, because love requires boundaries and boundaries require witnesses when love has been used as camouflage for harm. And the trial came with spring. Pear blossoms foamed like hope outside my window. Inside court, truth did its slow, awkward dance. Nothing like television. Everything like washing a difficult garment by hand. Took time and we cried. Nina's mask did not so much crack as curdle. She did not weep. She did not bow. She did not ask forgiveness of anyone but herself. The verdict came with the specific relief of a correctly solved equation. The sentence, years not months, landed with a dull thud that was not joy but something like respect for the ledger of cause and effect. After I went home, I opened all the windows. I washed the banister with lemon and salt. I baked a pear tart I could not taste properly because tears are not icing but they arrive anyway. I set 2 plates. One for me, one for John because grief needs props as much as love does. Emily came by noon with gossip and a new doormat that said welcome, which struck me as funny until it made me cry again. We laughed. We pictured the garden furniture we would buy and then stain with the same varnish John once used, because continuity is how you talk to your dead in a language the living can also understand. And now, dear listener, dear watcher, dear someone who has sat with me at my kitchen table while the house learned my name again, I owe you the lesson you came for, the one our stories must earn or else they are only lovely lies. Here it is, written in the neat slant of an old teacher who has marked too many papers to overpraise a flimsy essay. Love without boundaries is not love. It is permission for harm. Family without accountability is not family. It is a costume. Age without vigilance invites wolves who quote scripture. And forgiveness, if it is to be worth anything, must be honest and timed like medicine, not spilled like cheap wine to make everyone at the table more comfortable. I will see my son again in a room with a window and a clock and chairs that face each other instead of the past. I will tell him I am proud of the man he is building if and only if that man builds himself with the materials of truth. I will hold his baby one day if I am fortunate, and if he learns to cradle gentleness like a calling instead of a weakness. And I will walk my stairs at night without counting my enemies in the dark, not because the world is suddenly safe, but because I have learned to be my own witness and to invite good witnesses close. There is one more thing you should know, and I saved it for last, the way we save the crust of a perfectly baked tart, because the chew is where the flavor lives. The night after the verdict, as the house sighed into its new shape, I found Daniel on my front step at dusk, sober, thinner, eyes washed clean by months of speaking truth to rooms that didn't clap. He did not knock. He sat. I opened the door and left the bolt in place because love has a latch. "Mom," he said, and in his voice I heard three things at once. The boy he had been, the man he might be, and the stranger he had chosen to try on like a bad suit that didn't fit. "Can I read you something I wrote?" he asked. "It's a budget." I laughed then. Honest, surprised, delighted. Because pen and paper and a plan that did not involve my house felt like a miracle exactly the size of what life can hold. "Read," I said, resting my forehead against the wood. Close enough to hear, far enough to think. He began, numbers and hopes in the same sentence. And as he did, the pear tree loosed one late blossom that drifted through the open window, landed on the table and stayed. Tell me, if that isn't a sign, what is?